What's going on, everyone? It's Nina Infinity. Welcome back to the channel, and today we're going to be diving into the live-action Disney Snow White, which I can't believe I actually watched, as I've skipped basically every single Disney live-action since Maleficent. But because of all the discussion around Rachel Zegler for a better part of like 2 years, and her god-awful personality and interviews.
You said you were bringing a modern edge to it on stage. What do you mean by that?
I just mean that it's no longer 1937, and we absolutely wrote a Snow White that
She's not going to be saved by the prince.
She's not going to be saved by the prince, and she's not going to be dreaming about true love. She's dreaming about becoming the leader she knows she can be, and the leader that her late father told her that she could be if she was fearless, fair, brave, and true. And so it's just a really incredible story for, I think, young people everywhere to see themselves in. The original cartoon came out in 1937, and very evidently so. There's a big focus on her love story with a guy who literally stalks her.
Yeah.
Weird. We have a different approach to what I'm sure a lot of people will assume is a love story just because, like, we cast a guy in the movie. Right. Andrew Burnap, great dude. All of Andrew's scenes could get cut. Who knows? It's Hollywood, baby.
That has probably affected the box office of this movie and all the reshoots and all the drama surrounding this movie. And knowing that Snow White was a Walt Disney debut film in 1937, I couldn't help but be morbidly curious about what this movie was going to be like. And I'll say right off the bat, this movie was definitely not made for me, but I did speak to a few normie moms who took their kids ages between 7 and 9 to this movie and really enjoyed it, and actually said that they liked the dwarves and they thought they looked like the cartoon counterpart and that their favorite was Dopey. So again, this movie wasn't made for me, but it clearly was made for somebody. So maybe kids do actually like this movie. But I wanted to be honest about my review, and one of the things that I keep hearing from my normie friends is that I'm too bogged down by the culture war and all the stuff that I see online all the time, and that perhaps skews my views on movies, especially when it comes to Disney, and that I have a bias, which they're not really wrong. But I did really try to challenge myself, to separate myself and my bias about Disney and how awful it's become, to sit there and actually be a critic of this movie, to watch it for what it was and what it was showing me, and try and see the good and the bad. And, well, there was a lot of bad. But I did also watch the original cartoon right after, and it had been years since I'd watched the original cartoon, and I absolutely, of course, still love it. But I wanted to make a fair assessment and actually watch both and see what the differences were, and there were quite a bit of differences. So here are my honest thoughts on this movie. And be warned, there is going to be spoilers ahead. I'm going full spoilers on this review. The movie starts just like the cartoon with a flip of the book of the fairy tale Snow White, and it goes right into exposition and tells you the story of the young Snow White, who was born to a just and kind king and queen who wanted nothing more than a child. And this child was born during a blizzard and thus received the name Snow White. So we begin with an obvious acknowledgement that in this adaptation of the classic German fairy tale, skin color was not a factor, and therefore it's justified to have a non-white actress play this iconic role. And then we move on to this utopia of a kingdom where all the bounty of the land belonged to everyone that tends it. That is literally a line from the movie. And where her father teaches her to become a good leader means to be fair, brave, and true. Now this scene revolves around her parents and her at the wishing well. And it's a really important scene, the wishing well, which the father and mother visit with their daughter often, and they have like a shot-for-shot scene of them looking down into the well and seeing the echo ripples. Except in the original, there was a deep meaning behind the well and the singing into the well. In both stories, Snow White is being raised by the evil queen after Snow White's parents' untimely demise. But in the original, she's singing into the well and wishing, and this echo and this wish is coming back to her. And then that's when we see the prince appear, who seemingly had heard the song maybe more than once and finally found where it's coming from because of the echo of the well. The prince isn't a stalker, as Rachel Zegler would have had you believe. He is a prince who heard the echo in the well and fell in love with her voice, and following it to find Snow White, a servant girl at the time, and he doesn't even realize that she's the princess. But I digress. In the live action movie, that song is completely taken out, and so is the prince, but we'll get to that. And they replaced that song with their new iconic song, Wishing on a Wish, where she literally mentions the echo in the song.
They say all you have to do to make your wish come true is let it echo, 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 echo.
So instead of having her sing Into the Well, which echoes her singing and her wish back at her, and having it be heard by the prince, we have a new song that wants to show us that you don't need no prince. And she'll just wish on a wish until she becomes her father's daughter and whatever. And oh, okay, moving on. In the live action Snow White, she meets the prince. The homeless thief, Jonathan, played by Andrew Burnap. No, really, he's actually a leader of a bandit camp that lives in the forest, which automatically made me think of Robin Hood. This movie can't even decide that it wants to be Snow White and not Robin Hood because it has a lot of elements of Robin Hood. And the band of thieves are so incredibly out of place. And it just seems like they're in there to put in some type of message, if you know what I mean. So the bandit leader gets caught stealing some potatoes and is set free by Snow White, who gives him literally one piece of bread to take with him. And I was like, girl, why couldn't you just at least grab a bag of potatoes or something? Like one piece, like through a fence. Anyways, the queen asked the mirror about who is the fairest of them all. And the mirror's like, a challenger has appeared, and the fairest of all is actually Snow White. And the evil queen, of course, is pissed. And just like the original, she sends the huntsman to go kill her. Also, I'm just going to gloss over the very, very diverse cast in this German fairy tale kingdom because, you know, it's not 1937 anymore, guys. So come on. Duh. Anyway, the huntsman can't kill her because she's so very kind. And once again, nothing about her beauty is mentioned because I guess even they can't sell us on the idea that Rachel Zegler is supposed to be prettier than Gal Gadot. But of course, like the cartoon, the huntsman can't kill her. But unlike the cartoon, he tells her that you were lied to about your father's death, which leads us and her to believe that the father's still alive somewhere and she has to find him. But also it begs the question of how come the huntsman knew that the queen was lying about the father's death and actually had killed him and didn't do anything about it? So all of these people knew that the queen had killed the king, but nobody had done anything about it, and they just kind of kept going along with the evil queen's plans for the kingdom. They just let the country go to ruin. I guess they were just wishing on a wish as well and waiting for some little girl to come save them all. It doesn't make any sense whatsoever. She runs into the forest, and actually that part was done really well and close as possible to the cartoon version. And when those kind of things happen, it just really actually bothers me even more because it gives you a glimpse of what normal Disney live action could have been like without political messaging and modern day Disney BS. It could have actually been something awesome. And a nod to how far we've come with technology and creativity and the creative genius of Walt Disney instead of thinking that we can do it better, which is what this movie thinks. So after the forest scene, the animals appear who lead the Snow White to the dwarves' cottage. And before I get into the dwarves, I want to mention that I think that one of the biggest BS things that I saw and heard about this movie was how cute the animals were. Well, they weren't cute. In my opinion, they were just all soulless. You could tell how CG everything was, and everything is green screen, everything is CG, nothing real, nothing soulful about this. And all of their personalities were just gone. The live action really did disservice to the animals of Snow White. The animals in the cartoon were much more part of the story. They all had a personality and things they did that made the animals way more endearing. Like the little turtle that was always trying to keep up with the rest of the fast animals, and every time he finally got there, the animals were already running back to do something else. Or the deer who washes the dishes with his tongue and is told by Snow White to put the dishes in the basin and to be washed instead with water. Or the little chipmunks who were told not to sweep the dirt under the rug. Isn't that interesting, by the way, how the cartoon also had these apolitical messages, like teaching kids how to not sweep dirt under the carpet, or this song where she told the dwarves to go wash up before dinner and they had to like learn how to wash themselves and get clean before dinner. Now the message is something completely different, and modern day Disney is just awful. And so we get the dwarves, who are, in my opinion, just awfully designed. I could not get past the uncanny valley factor. And when I was told by my Norway friends that their kids actually like them, it just made me lose a little hope for this generation. And it made me kind of understand why these live actions keep getting made at all. The next one on the docket is Lilo and Stitch, by the way, which I think is going to actually do way better than Snow White. But anyways, back to this abomination of a film. The dwarves are honestly just awful, and their personalities are not established well at all. Interestingly, I realize that the most quote-unquote dated part of this movie is Grumpy, who seems to be a little sexist, which is kind of hilarious to watch now. But it's also interesting to show how he really was not interested in women in general and Snow White being all up in their business. But it was her beauty and kindness that really melted his cold heart until he realized how much he actually loves her. It was like her mission to prove to him that women were actually really awesome, and she wanted Grumpy to like her. A big part of the original cartoon was also that she was going to help them with their daily lives, because that's all she knew up until that point. She was being raised by the evil queen, who basically made her a servant who only knew how to cook and clean. And that is what she offered them in exchange to stay in their house. As a thank you, she was going to clean their house and cook them food, which they were ecstatic about. They were so happy that she was going to cook them food, because as we all know, and every woman knows, the key to a man's heart is through his stomach. But of course, we can't have that in modern Disney. No, 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 no. We can't have that at all. It just seemed like Disney didn't really want to even focus on the dwarves or have any character development for them. Maybe it was too expensive because they decided to do CGI instead of hiring actually live action people, little people, to do this part, which, by the way, is also a huge issue in itself for the movie and what started this very, very bad public persona about what this movie was about to begin with the whole Peter Dinklage thinking he's better than everybody. Let's hear what Peter Dinklage actually had to say.
You're still telling the story of Snow White,
yeah.
and Seven Dwarfs.
Sure.
So, look, take a step back and look at what you're doing there.
Yeah.
I know. It makes no sense to me.
You're
progressive in one way, but you're still making that backward
Oh,
story of seven dwarves living in a cave. What the are you doing?
And you know what? Most little people disagreed with him and certainly didn't want him as their champion, because the guy basically just pulled up the ladder behind him after he made it.
It's very disappointing that Snow White chose to not include us, especially when they're trying to say that this movie is supposed to be woke and different. It's almost like you're saying to be a little person is bad, so that's why we had to make them our cartoon. It could have created more opportunities for other people.
But anyway, they do a little bit of character development for Dopey, who's supposed to be afraid to speak for some reason. And then she teaches him to finally speak by whistling, and then by seeing how she's not afraid anymore and nothing can stop her because she's a big, powerful woman. Then he decides he's not scared either, and at some point he starts talking. While she's staying with the dwarves, at some point she decides, you know what, I'm actually gonna leave and go find the bandits who are living in the forest because I want to go find my dad. She's got a lot of daddy issues because she still believes the dad's alive, and this part just felt so chopped together and it makes zero sense and felt extremely contrived of why she even left the dwarves. They should have just kept her with the dwarves and focused on their story and character development. But no, she goes off into the woods and actually meets with the bandits. And they also have an actual little person in the bandits. So this just made me so frustrated because there was a little person bandit. But then he was good enough to be a thief bandit, but not good enough to be a dwarf. How does that work? Like, where is the logic? But anyway, she finds the bandits whose leader happens to be Jonathan, and they start singing some song together called Princess Problems, where he's basically shaming her for her privileged life as a princess, even though he met her when she was a servant and she helped him escape. But no, she's like some privileged princess. And like, he's telling her, like, who needs a prince anyway? Like, who needs a prince to come rescue them when you have a homeless bandit? Like, what kind of princess would want that when you have this homeless bandit? Because that's what every girl wants, right? A homeless bandit. Rachel Zegler and Andrew Burnham have basically zero chemistry. I had never seen or heard of this guy before this movie, and he wasn't anything too impressive or groundbreaking in this role where you would go, oh, this movie sucked, but the breakout performance was the thief guy. It wasn't anything like that. One recent thing I can think of where that happened was the abomination that was a live action Cowboy Bebop, where Mustafa Shakir killed it as Jet Black. And it kind of made you feel for the guy because you were like, oh, you had really bad shit to work with, but you were so passionate and you made the best of what you had to work with. I didn't get any of that from Andrew Burnham. And so instead of this beautiful song that was in the original, Someday My Prince Will Come, we have this god-awful song which is about princess problems, aka first world problems. And it's obviously so made for the modern audiences. They tried to think it's cute and funny, but it wasn't at all. Not to me anyway. So at this point, the bandits spot the Queen's Guard, and they're coming to find Snow White. And they tell her to run away, but of course she won't because she's Snow White and she's the bestest ever, even though she's never done anything but cook and clean inside this castle. And she obviously is going to help them out by stealing the main dude's horse, even though she ranted on and on about how stealing is bad and you shouldn't steal from people. But anyways, that's beside the point. When she does it, that's fine. And at one point, one of the Queen's guards somehow gets a shot off after the battle where Snow White and Jonathan are just hanging out and having a conversation about how great her parents were and why he fights for them. And he takes an arrow for her. And that's when they return to the dwarves and ask Doc to help mend Jonathan, who's about to die with an arrow. And so he does, but we don't see any of that happen. He just goes into the cottage and kind of heals Jonathan and then comes back out. And he kind of says something like, well, I tried to do all this stuff. And then he thought that Jonathan had died, but Jonathan comes back out like waltzing, I'm fine. And he was just like, oh, I thought you were dead. Because apparently the dwarves are so useless, they don't even know how to do anything. Anyways. Oh, also, and the little person bandit tells Snow White that Jonathan took a bullet for her and really loves her and stuff. And she's just like, oh, okay, I guess I'll settle for this dude. If he's into me that much. Well, she doesn't really say that, but basically that's what happens. Right after that, she proceeds to sing another unmemorable song, and they almost kiss, but they don't because, it's written in the script that she has to wake up by true love's first kiss, and they can't have their first kiss yet, so they almost kiss, but then they don't. Then the bandits decide to leave because they hear the Queen's men coming and they want to lead them away from the cottage and Snow White. So they're like, we're going to leave. And so she gives him her dad's locket for safekeeping and to return to her once they meet again. Now, back at the castle, the evil queen decides if you want something done right, you got to do it yourself. After asking the mirror again, who's the fairest of them all, the mirror tells her, you know what? She's still alive. So not you. And of course, Jonathan gets caught right away after leaving Snow White because he falls into some weird trap because he's just not very smart or bright. And then they take him to the evil queen, who recognizes that he has Snow White's pendant and that he might just be Snow White's true love. So she takes the necklace. By the way, he couldn't even lie and said that, he stole it from Snow White. Because he's a thief. It might have actually worked in that dialogue, but nah. So she locks him up in the same cell as the huntsman, which is so dumb. It's like, why would you lock them up in the same cell? And they later escape together because, well, it took 2 men's strength to break the chains. And, well, what? Plot twist. There's 2 people in the cell. So they could break the chain. Side note, Gal's singing voice is just awful and completely auto-tuned, but there are just so many things wrong in this movie that's just kind of lost in all of this mess. And at the very least, I can give her props for trying with this movie. I mean, it was so badly written that there's nothing you can do. There was no helping this movie. It had such a bad script. So I can give her props for actually trying. And she did seem like she was having a lot of fun doing it. At this point, though, Gal turns herself into the old hag who is missing the prosthetic nose for some weird reason, which was just weird. It's a weird thing to leave out of the makeup because it's kind of an iconic look for the old hag. But whatever, she goes to the dwarves' cottage where Snow White is packing up to leave once again and kind of stealing the dwarves' food and stuff like that. She's packing up to go off to save her daddy from wherever he's being kept. She has no idea. But she's just going to go off by herself even after the bandits and everyone has left. So she's just going to go off by herself to find the daddy. So the old hag gets at the door and tells Snow White that she's there on behalf of Jonathan, who's been captured by the evil queen, and shows her the pendant that she had given Jonathan as proof. So then Snow White's like, oh my god, okay, well then I'm gonna go rescue Jonathan instead. And the hag gives her some apple to sustain her on her journey, but somehow she convinces her to take a bite of it now for her dad. She was like, for your father, take a bite of this apple for your dad. It made no sense because in the original, the witch tells her this is actually a wishing apple, and if you take a bite of this, your wish will come true and your prince will come. It was like the whole thing about the wishing apple and why she took the apple, because she so badly wanted the prince to come back. Meanwhile, just like the cartoon, the animals have seen through the old hag's disguise and have ran over to the dwarves' mine to get them to come back to save Snow White. And Snow White, of course, takes a bite of the poisoned apple and dies. But right before she dies, as she's figuring out that she's been poisoned, the queen tells her, oh, by the way, I'm the evil queen and I killed your daddy. The queen then leaves and Snow White lays there dead for the dwarves to come to find her. And this is where the biggest change to the movie is made. And it made me so angry because in the cartoon, the dwarves also arrived too late and she has died, but not late enough to chase the old hag down. They go after her through the canyons, which they know because they work in the mines, during a lightning storm. They chase her to a point where the queen comes to her most famous end because she was trying to kill the dwarves by releasing a giant boulder, but the ground below her gets shot by lightning instead, and she falls to her demise. So the dwarves basically killed the queen in the original Disney cartoon. But in this, the dwarves were just made into uncanny valley monsters who were completely overshadowed by the bandits, who are basically kind of like Antifa. And they don't even kill the queen. You know who does? I'll tell you in just a second. Where was I? Yes. The dwarves find dead Snow White and put her on top of a rock. The movie then cuts to the mirror telling the queen that she's finally the fairest of them all because, Snow White's dead. Meanwhile, Jonathan and the huntsman break out of the cell together. And they go their separate ways because Jonathan is like, I'm going to go see what's going on with Snow White. And the huntsman goes off to see if he can get some allies to go up against the queen. Jonathan returns to the dwarves and finds Snow White dead on a giant rock. And again, another point to be made here is that the dwarves couldn't even craft her the glass and gold casket, which was meant to preserve her beauty, because they just loved her so much. They wanted her to preserve her in this beautiful casket that they made. But they couldn't even give us that visual because this movie is like basically a Temu version of Snow White, the cartoon. And so Jonathan surprisingly kisses the princess away. He kind of gives her a little peck on the side of the lips, and they proceed to go to free the kingdom from the evil queen by rising up all the peasants. And she dons this red hood, which kind of makes her look like Little Red Riding Hood. Again, this movie doesn't know what it wants to be. And they get the kingdom to confront the queen with all of the people of the land who finally have the courage to stand up to the evil queen because their princess has returned. And she's just a girl boss, so why not? And then the queen comes out to confront Snow White and dares Snow White to kill her with a magical dagger that she just made. And Snow White refuses to do it because, she's so kind and loving. So once again, the queen's like, arrest her and kill her in front of all these people. To her guards. Then Snow White goes on a rant about naming every single one of the guards, and she's like, I remember when you were a farmer, and I remember when you were a baker, when we all lived in this utopia and you grew things and had the entire village come and pick them and share them, and the baker would give the hungry people baked goods and pies who had no coin, which really makes no sense because if you're living in a utopia, why would the people have no coin and be starving? Why would he need to give them free pies if they're all so well off and everybody shares everything? And then all of a sudden, they're all like, holy shit, she's right. We did used to be farmers. Now we're killing people for the queen. And so the coup works and Snow White banishes the queen, but then the queen gets pissed off and she's like, no way, I'm going to kill you with this dagger that I just made. And she goes to kill her, but lo and behold, at the last second, her hand is shot by none other than the little person bandit who made some weird comment about being the best crossbow person of the land, even though he had a slingshot the entire movie. So the queen runs to the magical mirror and for some reason asks once again, who's the fairest of them all? And the mirror is basically at this point just says, look, honey, you're pretty on the surface and all, but not on the inside, so she's always gonna be more fair than you. And at this point I was just like, wait, even the mirror is basically saying, gal, you're really pretty on the surface, but she's nice on the inside. I didn't realize that this movie was supposed to be about being nice on the inside like Snow White. And then she gets big mad and she smashes the mirror, and that's what kills her because the magical shards of the mirror just take her and they take her into the mirror, and the mirror fixes itself and takes the queen inside of it with her. And that's how the queen dies. And then the bandits and Snow White and everybody and the dwarves and the kingdom have a big giant party, and they don't really mention that Snow White and the bandit get married or anything, but they all have a very white party with everybody dressed as white, which is, I don't know, I guess a commentary on how everything's new and fresh again because everything's white. I don't know, whatever. And that's it. Whew, my God, that was it. That was the movie, the live action Snow White. Just a soulless, honestly, spit in the face to Walt Disney's creation. I absolutely hated it. And I remembered why I stopped watching these live action movies, because they're goddamn monstrosities. And I hope I've quenched your morbid curiosity into what this movie's actually about, so you don't have to waste your time watching it, because time is the most valuable thing that we have. Speaking of which, thank you for taking the time to watch my review, and let me know in the comments what you thought of it, and let me know what you also think about where Disney's gonna go next. I mean, they only have so many classic cartoons left that they can turn into these abominations. So what do you think that's going to happen after? Where is Disney going to go after their roster is done for these classics that they're going to turn into live action? Where can they go as a company? Where is the creativity going to come from? If I was a Disney exec, I would be very worried. But do let me know if you did actually end up watching the movie. Did you enjoy it? Did you think it was okay? What did you think of the performances? Let me know all of your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to like the video and subscribe if you enjoyed this video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.